longtime broadcaster John Losey on Michigan Lacrosse Review, my broadcast partner on a lot of the UDM games. And we're coming off a really interesting weekend, John. And we had a lot of scrimmages for the high school programs across the state. And we're kind of facing a sort of the 500-pound gorilla in the room. As progress goes through the scrimmages into the season starting on the 20th of this week, we might have a referee strike between what is Mishlowa and members of Semilac and the Detroit Catholic League. It's not an issue in Grand Rapids. It's certainly not an issue in Lansing, but it is in Detroit. And it's kind of become epic lately because we're not sure if we're going to have officials for what might be the first play stoppage outside of either world wars or worldwide pandemics. So I say that loosely, and you know the same as I do. So just maybe some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean it's this is supposed to be a happy time and an exciting time and spring is broken and we're ready to go and teams, as you mentioned yesterday, really on Saturday, playing all over. I mean, there wasn't a lot of teams that were not in some sort of a scrimmage. But I've heard about this, it's been bubbling up for a number of months, really coming out of out of the regular season last year and then the fall and then now we're here and it's this impending, a dark cloud hanging over southeastern Michigan that, I hope that cooler heads on both sides prevail for the betterment of the kids. We don't need another blow to the sport of lacrosse.
All right, let's lay out the facts as we know them and in relationship to lacrosse. The Grand Rapids area officials are currently being paid $115 for a varsity game. The Lansing area officials, which includes some of the Flint teams, are $105. Mishlowa currently is at $75, which is they've been working at since 2021. Back in October, they kind of put out a letter and a suggestion that they would like to, I don't want to call it renegotiate because I actually haven't seen the contract, but they would like to have had it increased to get back to what everybody else is making across the state. Now, we could spend weeks on a discussion as to why there's not some uniformity in officials in all sports of the MHSAA, but they walked away from that to give it back to the organizations, the regional organizations that take care of that. The interesting discussion is, I'll call this is my words, the strike that we might be looking at is being perpetrated by a group of guys who want to say that they're independent contractors, but yet pay money to belong to an association to give them work. That's a legal argument for another discussion.
Yeah.
So in October, these conversations started to happen. And essentially, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, they met a number of times. And basically it was, no, we're not doing anything. From that point, you start having those discussions, and you start to put guys in the room. Some really difficult discussions between Vic Michaels, who's the athletic director of the Detroit Catholic League, as well as being a member of the MHSAA Executive Council. He has his position. Apparently, there's a piece of paper that says that they signed for $75 all the way through next year. The other side of it is they've got new leadership with Mishlowa. And maybe for the first time, they've been back down before, I think back to the Clark Bell, Ricky Jackson days when some of that went down. And I'm not sure any games I'm sure all games got played in those days. But we've got some guys on the side of Mishlowa who say, well, it is what it is. As we talked to officials doing our scrimmages and other guys, everybody's in the same dilemma. There's only a few guys talking about it. And last point before we get into the specifics, the MHSAA sent out, that's not true. Our Lacrosse Coaches Association sent out a memo on Friday through Adam Zernotny, who's our president, and basically said, guys, you should be aware of this. And part of the problem was, I would guess 60 or 70% of our membership didn't even know there was an issue. So if you're coining it from a writer's perspective, it's a bunch of guys in the sandbox on a variety of angles that are having a problem coming to a conclusion that really only hurts kids.
Right. Yeah.
And then this weekend, just to add the last part of it, we've got athletic directors from various school districts, some of them established in the lacrosse community, sending out letters saying, by the way, we will get you dinner. we'll make sure you get a 2-hour training and please just cover us. So my point to that, and we'll get to the money, if 1 or 2 or 10 schools do that and leave the other schools behind because they don't have the resources or the contacts, are we going to end up having 35 teams out of the 179 that are registered to play, completing a 15-game schedule, which is the requirement to be in a state tournament? And all the fractions that, and then the fractured part of that discussion. So it's an interesting landscape for the moment that's got grenades and landmines all over the place.
Yeah.
Let's start with the easiest. Should something prevail? And I know that the officials have had a discussion about some proposals, but if the rest of the state is at 105 and 115 or at 75, I don't know. Thoughts. That's sort of the facts, the best that I know.
No, and that's perfect, right? I mean, I think, you and I have talked about this for a couple of days. At what point does the public need to know what's going on? Because it's about setting expectations. I mean, you've got, you've got some of the top programs in the state of Michigan in this region, in southeastern Michigan, that are going to be affected. But to your point, I think that those higher quality programs or well run or whatever you want to call them, more established, they'll find a way if that's allowed, right? Or if they choose to do that, and it just hurts the majority of the other programs that really need to play, right? Them losing games is a lot different than a Brother Rice or a Catholic Central or a Heartland, right? Where you've got some newer programs that they just need to play, and so not having quality officials is going to hurt them immensely. And so, if we take a step back and if you bear with me just here a second, I mean, the lack of communication, the lack of, just common, let's get together and talk about this seems to prevail. And I'm not at the same meetings or in the same rooms as you are at being a coach, right? You got Coach Association and you've been around forever. And so, I'm not privy to everything. I just hear things kind of here and there, with messages and this and that and the other thing. But, I mean, what are we talking about here, right? I mean, we're talking about money, of course, and we're talking about, it's not like, and I can see both sides, right? You got one side saying, well, I've got a contract that says they're going to stay until the end of next year, and that's just the way that it is. It doesn't matter who signed it, who was the leadership at that point in time. I got a piece of paper. Now, you've never seen it. I've never seen it. I have no idea what that is and what that says, okay? So if we just go on that premise and say, okay, fine. Then you've got the officials saying, we didn't even know it was being signed, and look at the rest of the state and what they're being paid. Now, I don't think that they're asking to go up to the 115 or even to the 105 for that matter. I mean, I think that there is something in the middle to say, listen, give us a little bit as a good faith, and then just get us to where we need to be next year or something like that.
Yeah. As we're talking about this, I'm not saying that it's the athletic directors are wrong and Ms. Lowe is right or the opposite. I can look at the obvious numbers and suggest that. I do know from a lot of conversations that, and I'm not getting into the nitty gritty because there's an awful lot of urban legend, but one of the conversations I had yesterday, you kind of wonder, in the world of politics that we're living in right now, where it's so polarized, the win-win idea that you used to think about, sort of is lost by the wayside, and I'm going to win regardless of what else. So let's assume for a second that one side is right and says, this is what we're doing and that's it. At the end of the day, the kids get screwed.
Right.
The other side says, well, you know what? We're not going to sign our contracts or show up. And again, the kids still get screwed. And I guess I'm having this conversation out loud to say, and again, not pointing fingers at any particular people, which for me, that's unusual because I guess you got opinions for everything.
Right.
I just think of all the money, time, and effort the kids and programs have spent in the off season as a part of that investment. A number of officials, and I know this is true because I was an official for 40 years. And that's where I come down with it because I'm a coach and I used to, my federation number started with 0 for a long time. So I empathize with the officials. We said to the Mishloa guys, whatever the cost is, send me officials. My first 3 games are scheduled with officials. So there are guys accepting games at the higher rate. I know that's true. and we paid ourselves in Brighton yesterday with about 30 or 35 teams connected. All the officials showed up and did a great job. But my point to it is that, again, without criticizing and discussing, isn't there something somewhere? And I keep thinking back to some of it goes back to there's always been sort of fractured relationships with officials in some conferences. But it seems like we stop it up at a water's edge because one guy said no and doesn't want to lose the argument.
Right. Yeah.
Where's the state in this? And I understand
Right.
they want to keep hands off.
Of course. Always hands off.
So you have all this investment over, and then so here's the easiest solution. Let's assume for a second it's only a money issue. Go to your coach and say, listen, this is what I have in a pile to cover officials at $75 a game. It turns out that if you play a 9-game home schedule, it's going to be something in the neighborhood of $500 to $560 in addition. I've talked to a number of coaches who said, where can I write a check?
Right.
Same thing. So if money is the issue, that should be an easy solution.
Transaction.
Turns out I don't think it's a money issue.
Well, I think it goes deeper than that, right? I mean, it's the money is a transactional piece of it, right? I mean, it's okay. And just like you said, it's a dollar amount that you roll it all up and that's what the dollar amount is. But I think it's also, lines in the sand being drawn, just to, I don't know, right? I mean, we are so driven by emotion in our society right now that everything is, it has to be so polarizing that it can't be, let's just find middle ground here, right? Because, I think when you look at the Vic Michael side of things and you say, okay, well, there's this contract and we're going to run this like a business would, and if you're independent contractors, you sign this contract and that's the way it's going to be. Okay, I get it, right? But we're not talking about a multi-year, multi-million dollar deal here for auto parts, right? We're talking about helping and providing value to young athletes in our area, right? And so, and let's not even bring up the fact that we already have a shortages of officials in the area as it is for this sport, not to mention the abuse that they take, right? So when I came on and we talked about this, I said, listen, I see both sides. So I'm not leaning on one or the other, but cooler heads should prevail here. All right. What if it's a deferment of X amount of dollars and it's $10 more this year and we defer the rate? There's multiple ways to structure something where everybody can walk away and say, all right, I didn't lose, but I didn't completely cave and whatever.
Again, going back to solutions, there have been a number of discussions and what was this offered? What was that offered? I just mentioned one where you call your AD and say, hey, here's an extra $600, take it out of my account, cover your cost. Shouldn't be a big deal kind of thing. But then I think of, okay, we start to sort of scab this in a way that there's 25% of the schools kind of do it on their own.
Right.
Get to the end of the season and there's only 25% of the schools that qualify for the state championship. And all of a sudden, I don't know, Chelsea's playing Fenton for Division II championship. Now, I'm joking, obviously, but it kind of defeats the purpose. And I understand pandemics and certainly understand world wars. And that's, I guess what I'm trying to say with this discussion is, if I don't know what the other outlier is, and I certainly don't, because it isn't money and it seems to be ego, and I don't want to guess. A graduation is part of the contract that is even looked at for next year. You can't tell me there can't be smart people who come up to a solution. And that's the maddening part of this.
Yeah.
Because they're coming up to the water's edge as games are starting on Wednesday. And I know there have been conversations between those that are making those decisions, and I've heard they've been pretty ugly. Why doesn't the next group step up and, the membership step up and have the discussions with maybe some cooler heads?
And
if the final answer is no, that's it on at least one side. I hate to see what's next, because now you're going to turn parents loose to athletic directors. Because of all these seniors that they're going to lose a season because we're talking about $20 a game. Again, that's insane.
Again, right? I mean, again, the 2001 losing that entire season in 2020 is not a long time ago. And so, what are you going to do? Are you going to do this to another class of kids, really, and parents? And you mentioned, in the opening when you talked about the off season and so many more players. I mean, that really struck me this off season to see so many teams and so many kids from so many teams doing so much more in the off season to get ready to be ready to play because they're enjoying the game and they want to be better. Right. And then the other thing that I've been hearing, with this last week in tryouts is I'm seeing numbers up in a lot of areas. I know that Salem had 52 kids. I know Forest Hill Central is now adding a second team. Obviously, that's Grand Rapids, but I mean, you're seeing more and more where we're on the upswing here with this sport after taking the step backwards and maybe back and a half, with the pandemic, and now we've got this, and it's just let's just make it work somehow,
Well,
some way.
in the letter we sent out, and I think this kind of goes back to leadership to some extent. The letter we sent out was very specific about making sure that if we're going to scab it out, again, those are my words, not anybody else's.
Sure.
If all of a sudden we're going to get unqualified officials, and my point to that is this: if we go and get the guys we think we can get, and they, right now, if you're a brand new official for lacrosse, you can register. They waive the cost of registration because they're looking for bodies. I know Michelot added 40 guys, new guys this year, to make sure that we had more guys, especially at the middle school level.
And they worked hard. And they worked hard to do it.
A 2-hour conclave someplace in somebody's cafeteria, we're watching a couple of videos. As a long-term official in a number of sports, in a sport where you can get hurt by getting hit with a stick, this isn't refereeing tennis or cross country. You got to have eyes on the prize in this sport, especially at the lower levels where maybe you got some skill at the higher levels, but sometimes you get JV players that's programs that haven't played much.
Right.
Get one big JV kid, pounding somebody, the potential for litigation, the potential for injuries without having those officials that have some experience.
Yeah.
Cole Malatinsky, who represents the NFHS, was very clear, even in our message, make sure that you cannot play a game without, qualified, certified referees.
Yep.
Certified is one thing. Qualified is another discussion. And a guy sitting at his home, in his Barker lounger at home, who played high school lacrosse 5 years ago, 10 years ago, comes out and gets his. That's not a recipe for success in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-mm.
So if the state is willing to step up and have this discussion about making sure that their officials are protected, get the right guys on games, why can't they take one more step and arbitrate and have that discussion? At the end of the day, there's only one arbitration body. It's the logo behind me.
Right. Yeah.
And I know they've had those conversations. Fortunately, this weekend they're in Traverse City for MIAAA, and all the athletic directors are together, and maybe they come out with some discussions. But when you see what's come out Friday and Saturday from individual athletic directors in various places looking to make sure their games are covered, I don't know. I hope that the sun pops up tomorrow and something changes.
Well, yeah. I mean, if this isn't exactly what the MHSAA is supposed to do as a governing body, then I don't know what is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, something that is going to be detrimental to a sport. Now, you and I can argue, or we can have a discussion about the fact that the MHSA right now, as we sit here today, doesn't have a location for the state finals for either the boys or the girls. And then you have this. I mean, what is going to make them, pay more attention to lacrosse? I don't know, because we really haven't seen it, and I'm not going to go off on a tangent here, but this is somebody needs to do something.
And I don't want to get off on a tangent. Sometimes state championships are placed for different reasons.
Oh, sure.
I know that's certainly true in skiing.
100%.
We argued 20 years ago, 80% of the ski racers in Michigan are from the southeastern part of Michigan, where there are 4 ski resorts.
Right.
The long-term argument was that, we don't have enough snow at that point. So we did a 10-year forecast. Come to find out, there was no issues with snow. Are they smaller hills? Yes, of course they are. Being a Custa guy, first year, I'd made the decision that I thought, we'll throw this out. We made recommendations, and the reality to it was we all had to go to Marquette once every 4 years because of the distance traveled. Yet we can't come anyway. So those are really long geographical discussions, and I get that.
Sure.
This one is, and listen, in listening to all the stories, if this were negotiations for a car or a union contract or something, this would have been like the '70s blowing up, selective service agencies.
Right.
That's how, at least what we hear. We don't know all of the rest of it.
Exactly. Yeah. We don't
Both
know. I mean,
sides,
it should be
both sides of this
transactional.
could use, at least everything we've heard, both sides could use a chill pill, take a step back,
A moderator.
and understand that, again, this is all about the kids.
And this is where the MHSA would come in. They could be a moderator between the two parties involved and say, okay, I understand they signed a contract. Okay, I know you want to be paid this dollar amount. Where's that middle piece that we're going to go to? Right? I mean, I don't understand it all, and I don't know it all, right? I hear bits and pieces, as I said. I understand both sides of the coin, but in the end, I think this is what scares me about this standoff is that you've got one side where if you're an official, okay, you're making a commitment to the sport and to the kids, right? Because you're not doing this for money, right? No one is making a living on being an official. I don't care how, where you live. So they got a commitment to the sport that they want the sport to grow. They want to be good, all those things. Then you have another side of the coin that says, well, it is what it is. And they're standing their ground. And so I think the problem here is that you've got one side that is willing to hurt the kids. I mean, I really think that you do, because if they're going to stick on a piece of paper and say, because of this contract and this contract alone, we're standing firm. And you got another side saying, we're not even asking to go to that dollar amount right now. We just want something, in my understanding.
No, and certainly I'm not going to. I would disagree with you. I don't think the kids have even come up in the discussion. I think no, I'm
Which
serious.
is terrible. Well, then they're both.
No, and I get that. My point to it is, I think the decision-making bodies, both sides, and again, I'm only going on probably 50% of
what we know, right?
I've been on the phone a lot in the last week. I think it's a matter of a win-lose scenario to represent their own organizations. And you might make an argument that on Ms. Loa's side, they've done a very poor job of negotiating and discussing these things, because I think that's accurate. We started having conversations with them in October.
Yep.
About how we can present this to the athletic director so we can be successful and not have a problem. And they essentially dropped the ball. Conversely, we know that there's a couple of conversations by a couple of guys that represent the athletic directors and Similac and some of those organizations, and they're pretty hard-nosed about what they want.
Right.
There wasn't a lot of, because when it got to sort of a linchpin, there was some proposals made. Kick it down the road, then we'll have negotiations, or let the, my suggestion, let the coaches cover it. I understand there probably has to be an equitable solution, because you can't have 25 or 30. And I don't know what the school numbers are in this area, but it's got to be probably 70 or 75. You can't just, I don't know what the word would be. You just can't piecemeal it, because there has to be.
Yeah.
The SEC, which obviously represents the Ann Arbor schools and, Saline and some of those, they've already signed on. So we thought, well, maybe that was the linchpin, because there's a bunch of obviously athletic directors down there didn't think much about it. When that was turned on the next meeting, then the school side, at least again, rumors, said, well, then they even dug their heels even more, because somebody did jump and didn't follow us. So I guess the last part of this is, and I guess that we're having this discussion so people can at least know, this is Sunday afternoon at 2:00. We got games at Wednesday at 7:00. And there's one official who went and signed, and I've got a game Thursday, and 3 guys coming to my school.
Yep.
Because we have agreed to the payment rate. But the interesting part is, one of the guys of the 3 was part of the negotiations. And when our game was set, we would send back the information. The administration was the first guy to jump on it. Usually you let your membership go first. That's just the old, the way that things work. And I'm not going to get into the weeds, but well, anyway, let's hope something. I think the only thing that matters here is the kids.
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I don't see any movement. I haven't heard anything from anything other than that everyone is just digging in their heels, and we're going to see what happens. I mean, you've got teams coming in from out of town, right? I know Brother Rice has got Mason coming all the way from Cincinnati next Saturday. What's going to happen with that? I mean, it's just going to have just a ripple effect that's going to trickle all the way down to the youth level, right? And
I don't think, I don't think it'll have, will not hurt the youth level, and I don't think it'll hurt the college level, because the guys that wouldn't typically work high school are just going to double up on the youth stuff, and they're going to make the same amount of money. And
or if they jump up, and I mean, if they need bodies, it's an open market for officials at the high school level is what's going to happen, right? Either you get trained for 2 hours and you get a free meal, and your valet parking validated, and then you come out and ref games, or you're going to start pulling from kids that are, officials that are officials that typically haven't done those levels. So I mean, it's could be the wild, wild west.
the only linchpin left, I know I've used that word a couple times, but the only weight left is when parents get a full understanding of what is, and they'll get it this week. I can't imagine being an athletic director who's not sympathetic to the parents, because he's got to serve the district in which he lives.
Exactly.
And if you're paying X amount of dollars for track, as they are, you're paying X amount of dollars for baseball.
Right.
Turns out baseball makes $100 a game.
Yeah.
So the one fact you can't change is that the Miss Loa officials are the poorest paid officials in southeastern Michigan based on the current 2024 contractual agreement.
In every sport.
In every sport, they're $25 per sport less. And we already know that Grand Rapids and Lansing have had discussions to make it sure that everybody's equitable. So this is really an anomaly.
What's the point? I mean, what is the point in holding the line on this when you've got every other data point in your entire state? What's the point? What's the goal here?
Yeah.
I don't know. I have no idea. And you know who it comes down to? And I hope that everyone sees this. Who should this fall on, right? If you get parents upset and they're raising their concerns to ADs, it's coming down to the Michigan MHSAA, right?
Yeah.
Because in the end, they are the ones that are sitting above everything, and they're the ones that need to make things right or do something to make sure that the kids are not harmed. Sitting on your hands and ignoring the problem is worse than, helping make a decision.
It is. Well, we've hit this to death. I think we're at the half-hour mark.
Yes.
Following us, longtime official, college and both high school, and a legend and unbelievable legend,
Great
Brian
man.
Effinger.
Great. Yep.
Brian's going to discuss with me the points of emphasis that we hope will be playing on Wednesday. So if you want to know a little bit about the rules, sometimes the rules come in books, and we don't. Listen to this next section, because I think you're going to find some interesting conversation on how rules are enforced. And one of the ones I love the most, and that's what Brian and I are going to talk about, is face paint. The rule says you can't wear it in the way that you might think of it as decorative. And I think of all the guys in the pro ranks. So Brian's gonna have a conversation with us about face paint. I think it'll be a good one. So John, thanks for your time.
Eye black. Now the question is, and ask him, is it okay if broadcasters paint their face and they do eye black during games? That's what I want to know. That's important.
My only line to it is that they're using eye black for night games, but eye black was designed for the sun as for glitter.
Right. Yep.
So it has to be decorative. At any rate, that being the case, John, thanks for your time. Brian's up next, and
awesome.
We'll talk to him. Thanks.
Right. Thanks, Greg.
Welcome back. We wanted to get a chance to talk about points of emphasis for the NFHS this year, with lacrosse starting this week at the high school level. Brian, there are 4 areas. Brian's a longtime official with Mishloa, college official, and we thought we'd just sort of explain. Not every school gets the opportunity to maybe have an official come to them during the pre-week before they start scrimmages and games. So there are 4 points of emphasis, Brian. I thought we would take some time to explain it to them. So first of all, let me thank you for your time. And I don't think there's anybody better explaining these things than you, because you're a longtime official and certainly considered one of the best in the state. So the very first one on the list is probably one we don't need to spend a lot of time on, but cross prohibition. Talk a little bit about that.
The whole thing with cross prohibition is it really has to do with what happens when a goalie stick gets broken outside. And sometimes they mention it because they're changing language and they're erasing language, editing language within the book, trying to make it both consistent and easier to understand. So for everybody that's out there playing, it really doesn't have any cause and effect. As long as you don't alter your stick from the way you got it from the manufacturer, and by putting it in a microwave or something like that, you don't really have to worry about it. It really speaks to, are you playing with a broken stick or not? There are things within the rule book relative to that. So I wouldn't spend any time speaking or even thinking about, any changes to the cross.
Was a lot of it just cleaning up the language? Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the book reads better to make it easier if you do have those situations.
Right.
I do have one question that came up and a young man asked me today. I'm going to ask it. Is there a limitation on shooting strings in the pocket when you string your stick?
The limitation is how far down they can go. So they have to be no further down the top from the top of the cross. This is for field, not for the goalie.
Right.
Can't be any further down from the top of the stick than 4 inches. If
Okay.
you want to have more than 1 or 2 or 3, they all just have to be towards the top of the stick, not lower than 4 inches.
Okay. That's a great explanation. The second point of emphasis, and I'm not really quite sure how this works, and apparently there's a problem that I'm not aware of. So we'll talk about the solution, but that is wearing equipment properly. That's also the second point of emphasis.
Yeah, this one has to, and this goes back to some things that have filtered down on the NCAA level as well. The reality is people are not wearing their helmets correctly, right? And one of the ways I'll say that is how many guys do you, and they mimic those that are older than them.
Right.
How many guys do you see running around with 3 versus all 4 of the points of contact strapped
Okay.
in? And as a result, when you get hit, that helmet's not doing what it's designed to do, which is to protect your head. Because it's the same thing if you wear you're a skier, a great skier, and a teacher in that regard. If you don't wear your ski helmet properly, it won't protect you to the fullest extent that it's designed to do. And this is the same way, right? They want it so that if you get hit, it stays on your head. They don't want it so that you can put it on and take it off without undoing the 4 points of contact. And so that's the first thing. It has to do with the helmet. And they've reiterated that if a guy's helmet comes off, and no matter what, you're stopping play without penalty. Second, and this one has mostly to do with defensemen, and to a lesser extent, some midfielders who wear their elbow guards basically way up on the top of their arm. So they're not protecting. They're not really protecting anything, right? And what they're saying is they have to be down and worn in the manner that the manufacturer wants them to be worn. And again, it comes with a penalty. So this is one of those things where, short of doing what they do in other sports, girls lacrosse, soccer, where you have a lineup where you're inspecting every single player before the game, lacrosse doesn't do that. We just have a certification of the coaches who blindly say yes, and some of them don't have any idea what their kids are wearing or not wearing. This is one where, and we can't completely police it and see everybody before the game, nor stop somebody from moving them up. It's just put the things on and wear them to where they're supposed to be worn. So that's what it really is. People want to be protected, and let's be honest, they want to stay away from litigation in case something were to happen to some kid, I would imagine.
A lot of the PLL guys who emulate, the high school guys will emulate. You think of those caps, which is really what defensemen wear. They basically wear a Band-Aid over the elbow. But the guys they're playing against don't understand how to surgically use their sticks. So they're not just rapping out there and banging, which is very few rules are ever made that don't relate to safety. Everything relates to safety, and it just slides downhill. The less skill you have, the more rules, generally speaking, there are. And I understand that from that perspective. The other part of it is, you think of the new helmets, even Warrior, you have to dial the back in. And so I'm just saying this from a coaching standpoint. My second day on this, I literally grab the side of the helmet and pull up when they. Mm-hmm. So you don't have a problem, because the last thing you want is the helmet coming off. So coaches have to be a little proactive to make sure that, for example, they've got to be NOXI certified, breastbones, and some of the stuff that comes with that. And I think if coaches pay attention to those equipments and maybe go through an inventory, takes 15 minutes before practice, and then everybody's safe. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep. The last two are sort of interesting, and we'll start with the first one. Eye black, I wear, is it decorative? Is it functional? And here's really the question I want to ask. I know what the rule says. I know how the rule's enforced. And there's no possible way that the rule's enforced equitably across the state. So is it in fact decoration? Is it in fact useful? And how do you look at it as a referee coming onto my field?
Okay. So I'll give you my feeling on it. One, it's a point of emphasis that is not going away. right? It's in there every year, every year, every year. They talk about having a penalty for taunting because you're frightening somebody. They're saying that they want it to be a 1 minute non-releasable penalty. One, I think they're worried that people are putting something on their face and having messages on their face that really aren't representative of it's almost a political message, right? Where you're saying something that really shouldn't be said. In terms of what everybody does, I think they try to have fun with it, right? And that's for the most part what it is. I can tell you what the Catholic League did, and they did this last year, and they're doing it again this year, and I think it makes sense. It's like let them police themselves in the sense that if you're a coach and you've got an issue with what the other team is doing, bring it to everybody's attention before the game. Don't use it as a weapon by bringing it to a referee's attention in the middle of the game, trying to get a penalty for it, right?
That's perfect.
From my perspective, and it's happened when it's been raised. I've said, Coach, I'm going to go talk to them, and I'm going to take a towel with me, and they're going to wipe it off, and we're going to play. And because it doesn't bother me, right? It really doesn't bother me. If somebody has something that says F you on it, then that's different. And that should be policed by the coaches because that's a representative of, you're not representing yourself, your family, your school, your team, and your coaching staff in an appropriate manner, right? So I think that's where it comes from. And it's not just lacrosse. The NFL, they say that this is the same thing in any sport where eye black is worn. They have this rule in football. They have this rule in girls softball. They have this rule in baseball. So, it just, we don't really pay a lot of attention to it if we're lacrosse people, because I don't know what the rules are in another sport. So I think the best thing to do is to say, look, if you're going to do it and you got an issue with what the other team's doing, let's solve this right now before the game even starts. Because it's not one that has anything to do with safety. It has nothing to do, in my opinion, has nothing to do with taunting or baiting or hurting somebody's feelings. Most of the time, it's some guy who's drawn a fake mustache and sideburns on the side of his face. They're having a little fun. Let them have a little fun. And if it presents an issue, let's get it over with right now and slow up the beginning of the game. And now everybody's going to look like an idiot because they're going to have smears all over their face. What have we really accomplished? I know that's not the line that the NFHS wants anybody to take, but I think we also have to be realistic about how do we address this, on a game by game basis.
From a player and a coaching standpoint, is it fair that it's still going to be enforced erratically to some extent because every official has a little bit different understanding of it? Is that a fair point?
I think there's a possibility.
Okay.
Some people can't help themselves. Doesn't mean I don't like them, but some people just can't help themselves. Some people can't help themselves, and they focus on one thing, and then don't necessarily focus on another. I think the best way to do that is let's deal with it right now. Ask the official, ask the coaches. Are we going to have an issue with eye black? Because if we are, let's get it over with right now.
Be proactive for the game. Just be proactive before the game starts. Just
don't even let everybody come out, for the lineup when you've got 10 guys on each team. Meanwhile, there's 20 guys that are on the sidelines, and you're sending guys off the field to clean themselves up. Get it done and worried about before anybody gets out on the field where you're ready to start the game.
The interesting part too, which has nothing to do with wearing it, is that a lot of times the stuff gets when you wipe it off, it now gets on the uniform. And if you've got a light colored uniform, especially with the sublimated stuff, sometimes you don't get the stains out. But my one question I asked my kids, I said, you understand that this is reflective for sun, yet you play most of 90% of your games you play at night. Oh, it has to be a decorative factor.
It is a fashion statement. That's all it is.
No, and you made a point, and I always joke about this. I had an old coach who said, if anything revolved F you, if it didn't represent Frank Underwood, you better keep your mouth shut. So I'll leave it at that. So I guess the best suggestion is, coaches, just make sure you take the time to look at it and have that conversation with the officials so that there's no issues. And I think most people use common sense, and I think we can move on from there. The last one is a serious one, and I think it's something that really has to take precedence, and that comes back to it. I saw this at the Michigan-Harvard game today where somebody took 3 or 4 steps to go after a head. And the guy had scored early, and then at one point Harvard was up 7-1, and one of the Michigan defensemen laid the guy out. There's a new rule for head and neck injuries. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think, but again, this is one that has existed in the NCAA level for several years, and the NFHS has taken it, under advisement and then added it to their rules because the NCAA and the NFHS are on different cycles, right? A lot of things are tested on the NCAA level, and then where they seem to be applicable to scholastic sports, they'll trickle down. And this is one, and I think it makes a lot of sense and clears things up. Prior to this year, the way the rule book was written is that any hit to the head or neck, direct, indirect, big, little, and we're talking about cross checks and body checks. We're not talking about slashes necessarily.
Right.
So let's concentrate, think more in terms of cross checks and body checks. You're talking about the elbow, you're talking about the shoulder, right? Things of that nature. Where contact is made to the head or neck. And the way the rule book was written is it was a minimum of 2 minutes, non-releasable, could be 3 minutes non-releasable, and could be ejected. So if you threw a flag, that's what you were going to get. I think that there were officials, myself included, that were saying, well, man, that's not worthy of a 2-minute non-releasable penalty, even though everybody could see that there was some level of contact to the head or neck. There were times that we would come in, especially on the indirect ones, right? Not the direct ones where the guy just blasts right into his head. That's simple. We're talking about ones that starts lower, finishes high. And sometimes, to be really honest with you, you're sitting there saying, you know what? Let's call this a 1-minute non-releasable penalty. They probably don't know all the rules, meaning the coaches. They're going to be happy that they're man up. If the other guy knows the rules, he's saying, well, man, I'm glad I'm not down for 2 minutes. I'm only down for 1. Nobody ever argued about it. Well, what they've done now is they've codified it, and it's going to make things a lot easier on our side and a lot more understandable on the coach's side. I think as a result, there'll be more penalties called when hits go to the head or neck, because as you say, safety isn't going away. It's
Right.
becoming more prominent at every single level of sport. So now what they're saying is, if you start with a cross check, first of all, that's illegal no matter what. And your cross check starts in the chest, starts in the arms, starts in the back. It's illegal from the beginning. It's already illegal. But now it rides up and it finishes up high into some part of the head or neck. As long as it is not, starts big and finishes even bigger, that's going to be a 1-minute non-releasable penalty. You're going to see the officials get together and talk about it, even if there's only one flag, because now you're trying to understand who saw what. Where did it start? Where did it finish? So that the penalty is adjudicated appropriately. If this thing doesn't start low, it goes immediately high, that's going to be 2 minutes, right? Again, we're talking elbows, shoulders, cross checks for the moment. So those are going to be 2 minutes of non-releasable. If it's an egregious one, where a guy comes from distance, and there's a quote unquote, there's a story behind it, right? It's this guy left his feet. That's big, man. That's where you got a problem. He came from distance. He came from behind, so the guy never even had a chance to dodge or get away with it. Forgetting the defenseless player rule that exists in the NFHS, those are the kind of things they're going to get you up towards that 3 minutes and could get you kicked out of the game. Okay. In terms of slashes, you can still have contact to the head or neck when the stick is involved, where it's not a penalty at all. Nobody's going to say it's a brush. Nobody should make any signals. They just shouldn't call anything if that's the way they're inclined. In theory, you could have a 1-minute penalty, and it could be releasable because it just happened to make contact. It was a blow, and it was a striking blow, which is the way it's defined in the book. And if a guy takes a big swing and clubs the side of the guy's head or the top of his head, and you think it's more than just a run-of-the-mill slash, then you can go multiple minutes. You can lock it in. Right. Unfortunately, with the slash, it hasn't been as defined because they also want to say, hey, look, there is incidental contact that involves the stick because you're just in close quarters so often, and it's not worthy of a penalty. And people are generally okay with that. Now, it may not be the same at youth levels or any of those things, but on the high school side, you've got a bit more of your Chinese menu as it relates to the slash, but you could get yourself into releasable and non-releasable fouls. and there's going to be some discussion on the field about that.
Okay. Last question, and it's just more of a sort of a general question. We think of football and we think of lacrosse. And we see big hits in football, and there's no penalty. We see big hits in lacrosse. For some reason, there's those folks in the world that think that there's a way that you can hit as hard as you want lacrosse, and there's actually a rule that says that there's a limitation. It's a subjective call, certainly, but there is in fact a rule there is no rule in football for hitting legally hard, but there in fact is a rule for hitting legally hard if it's past a certain level of force. Right. Is that a fair way to explain it?
It's absolutely a fair way of saying it. So you have the unnecessary roughness rule, and the unnecessary roughness rule is if you deliver what is otherwise, as you pointed out, a legal body check in terms of how and when it's delivered, right? How and when, right? So it's got to be, they got to meet that criteria. But you've done more. It's more than what you really need to do to accomplish what your goal is. Your goal is to either get the ball, right? Help your teammate get the ball by having legal contact when the ball is loose within 5 yards, or to stop the other team from scoring. And if you go beyond what someone thinks is reasonable, then you can draw a penalty. And depending upon the veracity of that, it can be of that 1, 2, 3 minute type of thing. Oftentimes when you've got a late hit on a shot, a lot of times they're going to call that unnecessary roughness as opposed to an illegal body check. And the reason being is nobody can argue about
it. That was my point of having it, because there is that understanding. We think that football and lacrosse, there's some cross checks, but the whole point of the sport is in football, they don't have a stick that you can get hit with. So does that make sense to you, what we talked about?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, Brian, I appreciate it. We got a season coming up here that the actual season starts tomorrow. We've got games coming up as early as, actually, we have scrimmages coming up as early as Saturday, and then games starting the 20th. So as always, we wish you the best for a season, and can't tell you how much we've appreciated explaining the rules. If you got any questions, consult your book. And if you need any discussion, send a note to the guys from Mishloa, one of the best groups officials around the state, and hopefully we have a great season and see each other sometime during the road this year.
Look forward to seeing you, Greg.